Daniel. We're gonna talk about the conflict between Palestine and Israel. And I know you're an expert in this topic, so I'm not, and I'm sure that many people are not either. Can you please briefly explain the origins of the Israel-Palestine conflict for those who know almost nothing, like myself?
All right, fair enough. I mean, the origins of the conflict, I mean, it depends how far you want to go back. So a lot of people like to do this dance where, oh, it's not about religion, it's just about land. They're lying. There's a religious element to this that's plain, clear as day. Any Jew can tell you that Israel is the Holy Land. The basic tenet of Judaism is, here God says, here are my laws. If you abide by my laws, here's the land of Israel to live in. So, the Israel is the homeland, Jerusalem is the capital of the nation of Israel, right? The Jewish religion is about the nation of Israel and what that means. Every major prayer goes around it. And then you have, Islamists who are under the Islamic fundamentalist belief, some of them, Hamas especially, that any land once owned by the caliphate. So there are radical fundamentalist Muslims that believe any land ever administered by the caliphate are lands of the caliphate and should be Islamic lands forever. So Hamas in their charter, not only do they want to kill every Jew in the world, they also want to retake Andalusia. So Spain and Portugal must be conquered according to them as well, because they were once under the rule of the caliphate. So this is the religious elements that are in conflict. And then in terms of the basic, start of the conflict, it was Jews have always been in the land, Arabs have always been in the land, but after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, post-World War I, the British had the mandate for Palestine, which if you look on a map is both Jordan and Israel. And they split Palestine into two. They made a two-state solution, one Arab state, one Jewish state. The Arab state then renamed itself the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It exiled every single Jew, so they're ethnically cleansed of Jews. It's still illegal to sell your land to a Jew in Jordan. And then the Arabs in Western Palestine, which would become Israel, started to stall and didn't want a Jewish state and didn't want the Jews to self-determination. So through the 20s and 30s, there was a massive expansion in Israel as Zionists would buy land, often from absentee Arab landowners outside of the country. They would go into the deserts, into the swamps, and sort of carve out a living. And because the Ottoman Empire was collapsing and so poorly administered by that time, like the territory that you would call Palestine or Israel was not very hospitable to people. But that changes in the 1920s. So 90% of both Jews and Arabs or Muslims in the conflict now they're talking about, 90% of them had their families come in the last 100 years. Now, both sides can find people with thousands of years of history, but the majority of the immigration starts in the 1920s. So you have that, and you have the Arab riots. The official Arab riots is like from 1933 to 1936. The Arabs successfully managed to lobby the British to shut down Jewish immigration to mandatory Palestine during the Holocaust. The leader of the Palestinian Arab faction, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, was a good friend of Adolf Hitler, toured the death camps, liked the death camps so much, he wanted to come back and build a death camp for Jews in Jerusalem. And he was sort of in charge of the Arab faction in negotiation in Palestine. And he told the Peel Commission, so there's a Peel Commission, two-state solution plan, with the Arabs got like 80% of it, the remaining, and the Jews got 20%, and it was rejected. And if you see from Lord Peel's diary, Haj Amin al-Husseini's directive was, yeah, we know the land was bought legally. So the big lie was, oh, the Jews are stealing the land from Palestinian farmers and they're coming in. And this is dispelled in the Peel Commission. The leader, they say, no, we know the Jews bought it legally. We just want to kill them all. That was his logic. And you see why he was good friends with Hitler. He helped raise an entire SS battalion in Bosnia. And when the Jews declared independence in 1948, after the 1947 partition plan, 5 Arab countries, along with Palestinian militias, declared war and attacked them. And then they kept losing the wars that they initiated. The borders changed, and then there was another war in 1967. The Arabs lost that one, 13 armies versus 1 army. So they lost in 6 days, and they tried again in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. They lost that one. And then finally, Israel was able to negotiate for peace by giving all the land they gained back to Egypt, and they managed to gain peace with Jordan because Jordan created the PLO, the Palestinian Terrorist Organization. They started doing terrorist attacks in Jordan. They started causing problems for Jordan. So Jordanians and a bunch of Arab countries used Israel's help to kick them out. This is like Black September. They went to Lebanon then. The PLO started a brutal civil war that destroyed Lebanon, led to the Lebanese-Israeli wars. And generally, that's the way it went until you have the late 80s where the Intifadas start, which is sort of the shift from trying to destroy Israel with nation states and armies and tanks and all this, and through terrorist insurrectionism. This is where you see the rise of Hamas. There's the second Intifada. That's where you get the sort of the walls. And why does Israel have these checkpoints? Oh my God, checkpoints. Can you imagine the torture? It's like me as a Canadian having to go through to America and show my passport to an American border guard. War crimes. So this is the new thing that was after the second Intifada, and this is sort of your third Intifada, you can say, of this. So I mean, the root cause is everyone wants to beat around it, but radical Islamist fundamentalist terrorism and anti-Semitism. These are the root causes, and there is a bunch of what you say far left, progressive, communist jibber jabber thrown over the Palestinian cause over the years to make it more appealing to the Western youth and to sort of obfuscate from the fact that this is radical Islamist terrorists causing wanton destruction and pretend it's some sort of oppressor, oppressed. Can we map 1960s American racial standards onto the Israel-Palestinian conflict is sort of the goal here. So that's your very brief take 101. I did do a podcast with Kushal Mehra and Abhijit Ilmara. It's on the internet on the histories of anti-Semitism and going up to Israel. So if we did a whole hour on that. So there's an hour-long answer with Kushal, Abhijit, and I, if people are interested in that. But that's the shortest version I can give.
Thank you so much. I know that Hamas was formed
87, 88, around that time, late
Yeah.
80s. I mean, it's hard to put a finger on it, but yeah, around the first Intifada.
But the war is going on from 1948. What was before? What kind of war was it?
So it was against the PLO. So the PLO was the representative of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They were terrorists led by Yasser Arafat. So if you remember the Munich Olympics, this was the organization that murdered the Israeli athletes in Munich. They hijacked multiple planes, suicide bombings. So there is really no function in behavior that's different from the PLO to Hamas. The PLO then became the PA, and they have the Fatah al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade within that. So it's not much different. The PLO, they are terrorists. They have very similar ideas. There are a lot of radical fundamentalist Islamists in it, but the PLO was helped be created by the Soviet Union. So it has a more socialist jive to it, right? Palestinian Liberation Organization. This is very communist-y language. Now there is hardcore the PFLP is like the representative of, or was the terrorist representative of the Soviet Union there. So the PLO was sort of the middleman of the terrorists, a sort of generalized Palestinian terrorist faction. This was in the context of the pan-Arab movement. So when the Nazis were defeated, a lot of Nazis went to South America to escape, but a lot of Nazis who wanted to continue their work, most famous example is a man named Johann von Leers, who became Omar Amin in Egypt. But they went to the Arab countries and they continued their work ideologically to, undermine the Jewish state. And you saw a lot of sort of Nazi ideology bleed into the Arab world and result in sort of pan-Arab nationalism, which is Nazism. Pan-Arab nationalism is the Arab race is the superior race. The Arab race must expand and conquer. It must unite. The non-Arab peoples within these Arab lands would be second-class citizens. And, the Nazis need Lebensraum, so they went to the Soviet Union because kill them, take their land. So we need it for farming for us. That was the same thing with So you could see how this ideology clashed with the one Jewish state in the region. And that's sort of the offshoot. That's sort of where the PLO makes sense. You have this sort of PLO, you have this sort of mix of communist nonsense and Nazism, and that created the PLO terrorist faction. And they're considered the moderates in the region. So the Nazi communists, they're the moderates of the Palestinian faction, which just shows you where things are.
Thank you. From what I've seen, people don't really understand what is the difference between Hamas and Palestinian people. And is there any difference between Hamas and Palestinian Authority? And if yes, can you please elaborate?
Well, they have a different flag, and that's the difference. They have a different insignia. Their letters are spelt differently. But if you look, the prime minister of the one step below, second highest ranking person in the PAA, below Mahmoud Abbas, he said a couple of weeks ago that after the war they plan to form a unity government with Hamas. So the unity government the Palestinians want to form is the PLO, Hamas, and a Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Now, if you don't know anything about Palestinian Islamic Jihad, I can tell you they're a Palestinian group that is interested in doing Islamic Jihad. And if you don't understand what that means, well, then you probably shouldn't be talking about the conflict. I will say you probably don't have much to add there. So no, they're going into, they want a unity government. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, they have a pay for slay program in the West Bank. This was uncovered by the Lawfare Project internationally. We have the court records. This is proven. Even Mahmoud Abbas has come out publicly and defended this. So they have what they call a martyrs fund. We call it a pay for slay fund. And it outlines where you're born, who you are, like, and where you commit a terrorist attack, how many people you kill. So if you commit a terrorist attack and you kill or injure a Jew, your family gets a lifetime salary, lifetime pension. That's higher than any salary you would get in the territories from legitimate work. So this is how they incentivize violence and terrorism. So both groups believe in a full annihilation of the Jewish people and using violence to achieve those means. Now, Hamas might be more Islamic, and that might be a difference, you could say, but the PA is not a secular organization by any stretch of the imagination. Again, their militant wing is called the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. So tell me how secular that sounds. And again, they want to form a unity government. They all want to get into a unity government. There is no culture of democracy within the Palestinian territories. There is no, it doesn't have a history of like the Westphalian nation state. There's no history of democracy and rhetoric and working out your problems and community organizing and building. It's all jihad. Their entire culture is centered around jihad and destroying Israel. So no, there's no difference. And people might get mad at me for saying that, but if a government organization openly, proudly, and consistently supports advocating and committing a genocide, what are we doing here, pretending that there's any reasonable actors? Again, the moderates, the PA moderates, are a mixture between communists and Nazis, and they're the moderates. So no, there's no real functional difference, you could say. Maybe okay, so actually, okay, here I'll give this is what a Palestinian would probably say. A lot of Palestinians don't see the PA as legitimate, not because of their ideology, but the PA they would see as controlled by Israel. The PA has made more deals with Israel. The PA has some security agreements, so they might be seen as traitors or less hardcore and maybe trying to preserve their own self-interest more. Now, the ideology isn't the same. You can just say maybe Israel has a better handle on the PA, but the PA, if you look at it, doesn't even have a real good handle on their own militants. So, Celebi.
Okay, thank you. So they are just a little bit less radical.
A little less radical out loud sometimes, but I would say they're equally as radical. They just sometimes use less radical. They learn to sometimes temper their rhetoric in front of the international community better.
You mentioned the Middle East countries and Middle East culture. And how do other Middle Eastern countries influence the conflict? Like Iran, for example, Lebanon.
Yeah, I mean, so there's it depends on the country. So how does Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran influence it? Negatively, by throwing billions of dollars. And Palestinian Islamic Jihad is an Iranian proxy. Like, they're there to spy for Iran. Hezbollah is a direct Iranian proxy. Hamas doesn't like the Islamic Republic of Iran. They celebrated Saddam Hussein because he killed so many Iranians. But they do take their money. So they are funded by Iran. So the Islamic Republic of Iran pours fuel in the fire. Qatar, same thing. They pour fuel in the fire. They fund terrorism. Pakistan, to a lesser extent. Turkey is trying to create a sort of neo-Ottoman caliphate. So that needs to be watched. But then you have the other countries. You have the sort of the Abrahamic Accords, where you have Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, who look at, again, Iran and understand their real threats. And they understand who's funding the Houthis in Yemen to fling rockets into Saudi Arabia. So now the Houthis have also declared war on Israel. So it kind of puts Israel on the side of the Saudis and the Emiratis in this war against the Houthis. So for years, the Arab countries have enabled this problem. The majority of the suffering of the Palestinian people is caused by the Arab countries. Do you know that Palestinian refugees are different than other refugees?
No.
Okay. Palestinian refugees are not refugees. They're not real. Real refugees are dealt with by the UNHCR. There's a term, if you, let's say, I mean, I hear you from Ukraine. If you are from Ukraine You come to
Yeah.
Canada, you set up a job, and you settle your life here, and you integrate. You're no longer a refugee. You become a Canadian citizen.
Yeah,
It's not the same
exactly.
with Palestinians. Palestinian refugees never lose refugee status and pass their refugee status on to their children. And their children pass it on to the children. It's genetic. Palestinian refugee is the only genetic refugee status you have. It's dealt by UNRWA. So there's a completely different organization, UNRWA, which deals with Palestinian refugees. They get 4 times the amount of funding as a normal refugee, and they never lose a refugee status. It's anyone who had a family member on the land of Israel for 2 years between it's like 1917 and 1947. If you spent 2 years on the land and then you left for any reason whatsoever, you don't even need to be kicked off by Israeli. You're a Palestinian refugee. So you don't even need to be forced out by a war. You just have to be in the land for 2 years between a 30-year time period, and then all of your descendants are Palestinian refugees. So what's happened, right? I'm sure you've heard the rhetoric of open air prison, that is Gaza. You want to know what a real open air prison is? Look at a Palestinian refugee camp in almost every Arab country. So after 48, they set up refugee camps there. And the stated goal of the Arab countries was to use these Palestinian refugees as a demographic weapon against Israel. They always wanted to, this is their right of return, is take all these Palestinian refugees, again, refugees that have been conferred refugee status for years and years and years and years, and their children and children and children. And then they go after, they'll say, okay, we need to bring them back. And their stated purpose was, okay, once the Arabs in Israel outnumber the Israelis, they'll vote and then kill the Jews. This is their open plan. So they've been keeping these people poor and oppressed, and they want to confer their refugee status, 1, to undermine Israel, but 2, again, they get 4 times the amount of funding as regular refugees. So you keep them in these refugee camps. The United Nations is just throwing tons of money at Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Egypt. All these countries get tons of UN money, and then, okay, screw these people. Like in Lebanon, they literally were not allowed to leave the refugee camp until the 90s. They were there for almost 50 years. And you want to tell me open air prison that is Gaza? What, because you're not allowed to go into Jerusalem with a suicide vest and go boom? That's you have to be stopped and checked by a police guard to make sure you don't have any weapons before you enter a different country? Is this open air prison? Right? How many Gazans were working in Israel at the time of October 7th? So the Arab countries have been the chief instigators of the misery of the Palestinian people. They created UNRWA, which doesn't help them. It's just a way for them to funnel money from stupid Western countries into their coffers under the guise of humanitarianism. And they've, kept these Palestinians poor and angry and fed on a diet of anti-Semitism for years, and said Israel's at the heart of all your problems. But there were more Jewish refugees at the independence war than there were Arab refugees. The difference is Israel took in the 850,000 Jewish refugees, integrated them into the society. It was hard to do, but then they managed to integrate them, and eventually they became Israeli citizens, not refugees forever. And then now they're regular Israelis, and it's like every other refugee on the planet. But the Palestinian refugees, the same people who left as a refugee in 1948, are still refugees today. And their children are refugees who were born after 1948, and their children are refugees. And there will be a Palestinian refugee born in America sometime this year whose parents have never even been to the Middle East. There'll be 2 people who get together and make a Palestinian refugee, and no one in that household, none of the 3 of them will ever have been outside of North America, and that will be a Palestinian refugee. And then those statistics will be used by the United Nations to say, look how horrible Israel is. This year, they added 750,000 Palestinian refugees. And it's like, yeah, that's called people having babies. That's what that is. But again, the world has a completely different set of rules for Israel than it does for everyone else. And it's systemic, it's decades old, it's ridiculous, but here we are.
But what if we will imagine that this scenario was relocating 2.3 million people from Gaza to many countries, including Canada, will become a reality? What do you think is going to happen?
Mass chaos. 75% of Palestinians support October 7th. 3 out of 4 of the people we take in from the Palestinian territories will want to kill me and my family. We can't take them. We can't take them. They're not going to fit with our culture. They're not going to integrate. They're going to create violence and chaos. Because that's what they've been trained to do by the United Nations and the Arab countries. If you see what goes on and what's taught at these UNRWA camps, they're taught about jihad and killing Jews all day. And sorry, I don't want them in my country. I don't want them in my country. And the Arab nations can take them. They can go to Qatar. All of them can go to Qatar. If Qatar can take in the Palestinian leadership, the Qatar can take in the Palestinian refugees. This is where we just need a strong Western leadership to say, no, they're all going to Qatar. And all the other countries that support Palestine, they're going to Qatar, Russia, China, Pakistan, Indonesia, all the countries that supported the Palestinian cause, all of them can have the Palestinians. That's what it should be, is this and that. But I mean, Egypt and Jordan don't want the Palestinians. They said if one Palestinian refugee comes onto the Egypt, that's cause for war. Because they don't want Palestinians, because they know what they made. The Fedayeen, the Palestinian terrorism in Gaza, was created by Egypt, the Egyptian army. There's Egyptian records that they trained Palestinians to sneak into kibbutzes at night and slit the throats of women and children. And they're all Muslim Brotherhood, because that's what Hamas is. And the Muslim Brotherhood is the main opponent of Sisi. He doesn't want them. He knows that every country the Palestinians have gone to has erupted in instant chaos. Chaos and civil war follow the Palestinians wherever they go. And there are reasons why. Is it because they're inherently evil with no soul? No. It's because they're taught to hate from a young age. They're rewarded for hate. They're rewarded for jihad, and they've been fed that their entire goal is to destroy Israel. So when they go into countries and those countries, like if they come to Canada and Canada's not sending bombers to Tel Aviv, like if we're not bombing Tel Aviv, these people are going to get angry and they're going to get violent, because they've been raised in a culture where ultra violence and anti-Semitism is rewarded. So they're going to enact it out here. And that's just the way it is.
We can see a huge increase in anti-Semitism incidents. And I wanted to tell a little bit more about how does the Israeli-Palestinian conflict impact the Jewish community outside of Israel, like those who live abroad.
Yeah, we feel it, because we've known for a while that Israel is the excuse a lot of anti-Semites need to come out of the woodwork. And listen, the Muslim Brotherhood has a very strong presence in all of Western civilization. And the Hamas is the militant wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, Article 2 of their charter. No one denies this. The Muslim Brotherhood proudly supports Hamas. They say they're part of it. And they have many organizations in Canada. Some of them openly say we're Muslim Brotherhood. And all of them teach virulent Jew hatred. And they all use Israel as an excuse for their anti-Semitism and their activism they're pushing. So yes, there's something about the Jews that drives crazy people crazy. There's just something about it. And we can go into the history of this ad nauseum, but it is what it is. So when anything happens in Israel, things get dark, because people start attacking Jewish businesses, and the lefties attack Jews and say, we're not attacking Jews, we're attacking Zionists. Okay, 95% of Jews. And they're boycotting Jewish businesses, and they're harassing, and they're getting really riled up. And, there's a lot of disinformation that comes out from the Palestinians. Again, we're just taking Hamas's word on everything. The Gaza Ministry of Health is Hamas. There's no way 6,000 kids have died. That number is obviously a lie. Why? It's a Hamas lie. How could you say that? Remember the hospital chief, the hospital they said Israel bombed, that PIJ bomb, 500 casualties? 500 casualties. You know how many people died in the Beirut explosion, that massive Beirut explosion that actually happened? It was like 280. So no, I don't believe any of the numbers coming out of Gaza, but our media does. The media, the CBC, BBC, ABC, like all the government broadcasters just, Hamas said this, it's true. And then if Israel says something, alleged claims by the Israeli military say that Hamas is like, we see it. And, it manifests on our streets where Jewish business attacked. And it's the topic of conversation in almost every Jewish family of what is the rising tide, like how are we going to confront this? And sadly, it is what it is. And this is a symptom of the breakdown of Western civilization, as we lose our values, as we get further off course, and as no one can trust anything. Anti-Semitism takes root, because it's often rooted in conspiracy. And people don't know what to believe now, because they've seen the experts lie to them so many times that, it's just, impossible to trust anything that comes out. So, people are going to be led down a dark path in the coming decades if we can't fix our institutions. So no, it's bad. It's bad. And Israel's always the excuse the anti-Semites use. And then they use Israel as an excuse, and they say, listen, if it wasn't for Israel, there'd be less anti-Semitism. Israel creates anti-Semitism. Yes, because no anti-Semitism happened before 1948. Yes, nothing happened between 1939 and 1945 that was in any remote way anti-Semitic, but we've heard it all before. We're going to hear it again, and this is where we are with the Israel-Palestine thing. There's just so much hatred and misinformation that's been piled up against Israel over years, and it's simmering to a bubbling point now, and we're dealing with the backlash.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel. Have a nice day.
You too.